So how much run should J.J. McCarthy get in the preseason? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. My hashtag everydayers, my frequent question askers. Today is Twitter Tuesday, so thank you all very much. We will get to those. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today's episode, like I said, is Twitter Tuesday. That means I'm answering your questions. If you have questions for me, you can submit them anytime in the Google form that is linked in the show notes to any podcast episode. You can also send an email whenever you want to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. Even if I don't respond, I will read it. Today, I'm going to start with one from Rock NHL, who asks, if you were in charge of allocating the QB playing time in the preseason, how would you do it? If it were me, J.J. McCarthy would probably just play all 3 games, just fully. Like, just get all the tread on his tires, all the work. Sam Darnold's fine. I think the idea of joint practices as a replacement for the preseason makes a lot of sense and is actually a really good idea. I'm really in favor of that. And I want the league to go for more toward that, toward competitive, high octane, high tempo practices. I think are a better preparatory tool than a preseason game where you're slowed down by the rigmarole. You're getting the sideline operation down a little bit. And I think we maybe have lost a little bit of that, which is maybe the cost here, but it comes at the benefit of way fewer injuries to key players in the preseason. And I think that's worth it. So that being said, no Sam Darnold. That it is what it is. If it were me, I'd put J.J. McCarthy in for everything. Maybe you'd get I'd give a quarter to Nick Mullins, a fourth quarter, and then a fourth quarter in another game to Jaren Hall to make that decision. But that's probably going to be plenty to make that decision on. And then otherwise, it's just all about getting J.J. McCarthy tread on his tires. MS6 Boy asks, what's with this heavy run talk versus the Raiders? I would think let J.J. go out and sling it. So I could not find what you were talking about. But maybe Kevin O'Connell's just being really based. Maybe he just rocks, and that's why he wants to run a lot in the preseason, because that is God's favored way to play football. You ever think of that? I don't know. I think run plays are more, I'll call them more expensive. There are more moving parts to those, whereas I think learning pass scheme is harder because there are so many different kinds of things that can happen. But I feel like on a pass play, the concepts and the routes, when you run a basic, it's always going to be the same in a lot of these playbooks. It's always getting the 15-yard basic is what we do. We do it at 15 yards. That's the depth. Maybe you'll adjust it for game plan every once in a while if you think you see a hole in a coverage or something. But a lot of those ideas are simplified, and run plays, I guess, are a lot more exposed to tiny little details and they're very synchronized swimming, and therefore I think they might need a little bit more practice to get in. And it's also, especially for linemen, if you're trying to make the team, which is what these preseason games have really turned into, is deciding who actually does and doesn't make the team. For linemen, it's all about run. If you can't run, if you can run block, that's going to be your avenue to the team. Versus, pass blocking, you're going to get out there for 8 reps. We're not really, you might not give up a pressure in those 8 reps and you still might be bad. But on a run game, I think there's more to learn about you. But that's just a very much a matter of opinion. So if you don't agree with me there, that's totally fine. Skullchester asks, what are your favorite offensive and defensive schemes and why? I don't really know if I have a favorite defensive scheme. I think most defenses have something. It's kind of They all have some version of cover 2. They all have some version of cover 3. They've all got aggressive blitz packages. They all have, softer things. They all have different ways to fit the run and all that stuff. And for me, defense is also very reactive, right? Every defense, at least at the level we talk about, the NFL, every defense needs to have some spill fits and some box fits. I don't know if I'm saying a preference for one or the other. Sometimes you need to spill the run outside. Sometimes you don't want that guy getting the edge and you want to funnel him back in. Depends on who your guys are. But offensively, big gap scheme guy, I think is what I'm learning is I've decided I like counter a lot and power a lot. I think counter, especially as a pairing with zone, because a zone reach block and a down block in counter can be easily mistaken for each other. And that is like a way to kind of do deception and maybe get people flowing the wrong way. And also having pullers, I think it gives you a number advantage, and I like power. I think that it's also there's just some red meat, like red blooded, United States kind of vibe of me that just likes to see the big man go boom. Josh asks, with JJ's footwork coming along and his rotation is at 70% more than what would be the next step in his. I think I meant 70 degrees. If I ever said 70%, I meant 70 degrees. In terms so hip rotation is going 70 degrees beyond where you want. So he's over rotating. That's the thing I've been talking about. If that's what you're talking about. But then he asks, what would be the next step in the process after he gets to taking care of layering in balls? So this is for layering balls. The more power you're getting out of your body, the more control you have over that power with your arm. But if your arm has to start generating power by really winging it, you don't have as much control over that arm. So that would be kind of the next thing. But also a big step is getting used to being a right foot back quarterback. That's totally new footwork for him. And then the classic rookie stuff of the next thing is probably just getting faster about the reads. It seems like he's executing the reads the way you want him to, but he's doing it slowly, too slowly to be able to put him on the field right now. So the next thing would be to speed that up. And I think once you're getting on time and in rhythm, then we start talking about, is it time to go out on the field? Pete Sorensen asks, it seems that the storyline for so many rookie quarterbacks is that they need to work on mechanics. How is it possible for top prospects coming from big time systems to be entering the NFL without these issues corrected by staff in place in college? The answer to that is that the standard in the NFL is just different than the standard in college. Even the biggest programs in college will just put up with some flaws because the expectation is different. Maybe the best indicator you have of this is the way that college defenses do their coverage. College defenses will give up, you might know, the turkey hole if they're playing cover 2, that sort of slowly closing gap between the cornerback who's playing in the flat and playing kind of up toward the line of scrimmage and the safety who's coming over the top, and you can hit that throw. NFL quarterbacks can hit that throw over and over and over and over again on you. College quarterbacks, you can dare them to do that, and you can maybe actually get them to miss because college quarterbacks just aren't as good as NFL quarterbacks. And that standard of play goes everywhere in college. Everybody who comes out of college, even the best prospects, have to show up and find a way to get better and improve their game to succeed in the NFL. That's just the way it is when the level of competition skyrockets like that. You are just suddenly in a D1 all-star game all the time. And that means that these little kind of nitpicky things, like your shoulders come around a little too much, your plant foot could maybe rotate a little bit back toward the inside. All these stupid little things that are tiny details that won't affect every throw, but will affect some of them, are the difference between the boys and the men. But it's easy to mix those up because you only ever see college players playing against other college players. But if you ever had like an exhibition of a college team versus an NFL team, you'd kind of see the drop off is steep. I've got a lot more questions to get through. I'm going to try to fire through as many of them as possible coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This summer, FanDuel is giving you a new boost or bonus daily, every single day. No matter who you are, go on to FanDuel.com and see what they've got rolling for you. Vikings at 7.5. Right now, people are slamming that under. So if you think that they will beat 7.5 wins, There's a lot of meat on that bone for you, or you can wait until it goes to 7 even, and then if they are 7-10, you get a push, whatever it is. Or if you want to bet on a home run prop or the Olympics, you can find all of that at FanDuel.com. FanDuel, make every moment more. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. After you're done here, I'm sure your fantasy draft is coming up. Go check out Locked On Fantasy Football. Get that edge you have been so searching for. You can find that wherever you find your favorite shows. Moving right along with this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Next one comes from Purple Nurple, who asks, when do you expect a league ruling on Addison's DUI case? Before the season, sometimes after his court date or plea on October 7th, next offseason. So this is the Jordan Addison news portion. The next development we have is just he is scheduled to be arraigned at October 7th. That's where you enter a plea. If you enter a plea of not guilty, then you know the trial process continues. If you enter a plea of guilty, you've probably worked something out, but the arraignment is part of that process. So that's not his actual like trial. That's not an like courtroom. It's an arraignment, and that is October 7th. And my guess for the timeline for the NFL is to wait for the entirety of the process to play out. So that goes through whatever plea there is, that goes through sentencing, that goes through any negotiations, which will take a lot longer. So my guess, and I am not a legal expert, but if I had to guess, I would say that any suspension levied would affect next year. I think it'll take that long to happen. But it could also just kind of like slam right into you in the middle of the season. So be ready, right? Thank goodness for Jalen Naylor blown up, right? Chris asks, if Jordan Addison gets suspended, could we place him on IR, or does he have to actively serve the suspension? He goes on, there's a special reserve list for this, but no, he does not count against the 53-man roster for the games he is suspended for, if that's what you're asking. There's a reserve suspended list specifically for this. He would not get his game checks, though, because it's a player conduct policy thing. So it is sort of it's a timeout, but it's also like a fine of that many game checks, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Griff asks, Jordan Addison court date is the day after the Vikings play in London. What happens there? A few options. I think timeline-wise, you could just hop on a plane right after the game and probably make it. You'd be exhausted, but you'd be in the room you're supposed to be in. But the other one is you can move this. You can schedule a hearing with a judge, and if you have the resources to do so, which Jordan Addison definitely does, you can get a meeting with a judge and ask and say, hey, my schedule's like this. Can we delay? Can we move this? Which is also another reason why I think it might not actually come to pass until next year, because like they can delay this as much as they want. If you remember the Star Caps case, Pat Williams never served a suspension because he just delayed it for the last 2 years of his career, and he was like, well, I'm retiring now. Nate Walton asks, do you think Harrison Smith is a Hall of Fame or just a Ring of Honor guy when he hangs up the cleats? You're not going to like this. We actually talked about this on Minnesota Football Party, and Nate Walton went on, this was in an email, Nate Walton went on to say, as much as I love Harrison Smith and all that, I think I have to admit that he's not going to make it. Here's my deal. I think that he is good enough to deserve it on a truism level. And if God himself were deciding the Hall of Fame based on unassailable meritocracy, I think Harrison Smith would make it. He played 13 years and he was one of, if not the best at his position for all of it. But I don't think he's going to sniff it. The reason is, the accolades that typically bring you in All Pros and Pro Bowls and stuff, he's All Pros in particular, he's missing those. Because he shared a lot of time with Troy Polamalu, and then he got old for once, and Ed Reed and Cam Chancellor and the Legion of Boom and all that stuff. Like there have been a lot of really big time safeties that have beat him out for those accolades, which I don't know if is fair and is a part to do with the second thing, which is he's been on a lot of mediocre Vikings teams. With him on the team, the Vikings have been to the NFC Championship once. That was 2017. And otherwise, they've been also Rans. I think if the Vikings, say, win the Super Bowl in 2017, it is a much different conversation. Should it be that way? No. But look at where Jim Marshall is at, right? These players struggle to get in if it is not for more team success. You're going to have players that are worse than Harrison Smith who come off of that 2005 Steelers team that make it to the Hall of Fame. That's not fair, but it's the way it is. Gank Lover asks, hey, I have heard a couple times on the pod that you've mentioned that Van Ginkel hasn't come back from injury yet, but it seems other people reporting on camp have been saying that he has been active and rotating with Turner. So I tried to look at what you're talking about, and I couldn't find from like the beat reporters of Alec Lewis and Will Raggett and Matthew Collar, and like the ones that are active on Twitter at least, which is where I mostly find what they have to say, and they're like notebooks and stuff, and they didn't have anything. Way back on July 22nd, O'Connell said that Van Ginkel would be ready to go soon, but had a ramp-up period and that he expected him to come back when the pads were on. But I haven't heard confirmation of that, so that maybe that's a question for one of those actual beat reporters. Hey, did he actually show up when O'Connell said he was supposed to? So I guess that's the deal. We were told he was supposed to be there by now, but doesn't sound like he is. I feel like they would have mentioned that if they had noticed him out there for the first time. Andrew asks, you've mentioned in the past how Darrisaw has a wider split and is on his own island. Does this create more room for the left guard to cover and therefore make it beneficial to have an uncharacteristically tall guard like Brandel? So kind of the height and wingspan doesn't matter. That's more of a reach thing. That's more about like having a reach advantage as a boxer kind of, if you can use that. But also, I don't know if the juice is worth a squeeze at guard because you have a leverage disadvantage when you're taller. If you're like taller and leaner, the way that tackles tend to be versus short, stout guards. And the difference is like 3 inches, but still. But what I'm talking about with the splits thing is splitting Darrisaw out wider makes it harder for Darrisaw and easier for everybody else. I don't really think that makes the left guard's job that much harder. Because if that left guard, like, essentially it means we're never sliding to Darrisaw's way. This wasn't as much the case last year as it was in 2022. Last year, they kind of backed off that a little bit. But in 2022, which was the really crazy Darrisaw's playing unbelievably year, had his concussion, but was playing out of his skull that year, the O-line splits, like there would be a visible gap between Darrisaw and the left guard. And that extra space would still be Darrisaw's responsibility, and sometimes he would have to use his footwork to get back to the inside and cover that B gap. But it also kind of would be a come and get me thing where it screams to the defense, we're never sliding to Darrisaw's side. We're always going to have a slide over here. So if you want to send your best edge rusher and get him one-on-one, he has to go to Darrisaw. And Darrisaw would win a lot of those matchups. And it allowed for wins in pass protection. But it basically guaranteed that he would be on an island. But that extra 1 foot of space in the alignment, no, that's not going to make a huge difference in terms of like needing a different wingspan. So many more questions coming up here on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is online therapy made easy. So whether it is trying to deal with the disappointment of your favorite sports team or something a little bit more tangible and real, whatever it is you're trying to deal with, if getting into therapy is something you haven't really thought about because of the scheduling of it and the inconvenience and the hassle, BetterHelp is designed to be online, flexible, and whatever format you're comfortable with, phone call, video chat, even incongruous texting if that's what you're into. Try it out at betterhelp.com/lockedon. They'll match you up with a licensed therapist they think is right for you. And if you don't end up jiving with that person, you can switch therapists for no additional charge. And I super recommend that you do think about doing that and be really choosy about your therapist. Getting the right person is really important to having success with that. If you have the wrong person and then you think all therapy is like that, you might turn away from the whole thing entirely. And I don't think that's good for you. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Next one comes from Skoll or whatever, who asks, how do you expect Flores to adjust for the way opposing defenses used hots from the backfield to poke holes in last year's defense? Okay, so one of my theories for what went wrong in the back half of last year, and there's that kind of December slump last year with Flores' defense, was that they figured out that the immediate flats were available. Now, any defense has holes somewhere. Every defensive scheme has holes somewhere, and where you decide to kind of seed those holes is just like part of a philosophy. For Flores, the philosophy was you can throw a ball east-west to the flats, we'll at least rally and tackle, that's going to limit. I'd rather give you up that hole than give up, say, the turkey hole way deep, right, where every quarterback can hit that one. But teams realized that, and they also realized that they could manipulate the who blitzes, who doesn't game to make it so that the biggest guy on the field, Harrison Phillips in a lot of cases, would have to be the one chasing to the flat. And they could essentially design plays where the running back could beat the flat defender out to the edge and you can get an explosive off of a check down off of a hot. So how do you deal with that? More underneath zones would be the way, and essentially changing a philosophy or adjusting your philosophy to say, all right, we'll give up holes in the deep part of the secondary. There will be places to throw the ball deep in the secondary, difficult angles for safeties to get. We'll put more of the difficulty on our safeties, which is a group that we trust, right? We like that position group, and less on the linebackers and the corners and defensive linemen dropping into coverage. We'll make the safeties do the hard parts of coverage, which will mean that they'll have a worse season because they'll have a harder job, or a worse season to our perceptions. But you have to understand if the degree of difficulty goes up, right? And that way you can't just get the ball out quick on a hot route and win. You have to find, with a blitz of 7 people coming, a deep route. And instead of the challenge being, can you sort this blitz out? It's, can you get rid of the ball fast and downfield? And just kind of hope that a lot of the teams can't answer that call. But ultimately, the Flores defense, when it is as aggressive as it is always asking the question, can you handle this? It will always be offering a challenge to the offense, and if the offense can rise to and meet that challenge and defeat that challenge, they will move the ball. It's always going to be the way it works. That the defense is very clear about what it's asking the offense, and if you have an answer to that question, you win. That'll be where the weakness is. Jalen Nailers-Taylor says, I love that. Given Naylor's nuclear ascension and his propensity to get injured, would it make sense to take precautions to protect him from himself to make sure he's available when it matters? Preliminarily declare him wide receiver 3 and limit preseason time. I don't know if he's like an injury. He had a bad hamstring injury last year, but that doesn't tend to like resurface in the same way that like a bad knee injury can, or like a back injury or something like that. Like once you're over it, you're over it. And in terms of, like, he had like a hand injury his freshman year in college, and he had like, I think he missed a couple games here or there sometimes, but I don't know if his health, like, I think there's a recency bias going on here with you. That said, if you I think the order of operations has to be the other way around. You have to decide that he won wide receiver 3. If you're not 100% sure that this guy's beating out Brandon Powell, no, you do not need to put him in bubble wrap. Put Justin Jefferson in bubble wrap, but don't put a guy in bubble wrap who hasn't even won the job for sure yet. Now, I think he maybe has. And so once he has won that, once you've made that choice, yeah, there's no reason to put him in the preseason. You got your prep in the joint practices like we talked about. Jack asks, the last 2 years we've gotten some of the biggest name UDFAs, Ivan Pace, Andre Carter, Dwight McGlothern, and Gabe Murphy. Do you think Kwesi uses this as a way to bolster draft classes where he has to use some of the capital in trades? And what are your thoughts on this strategy? I don't know if we can call it that on purpose. They had draftable grades on these players but didn't draft them. And I think if we want to praise this as a strategy, I think what we can say is that Kwesi has done a good job of identifying players that they think are good, but don't think will get drafted. Like they've done a good job of identifying the draft stock of these players by saying like, hey, we really want Ivan Pace, but I think we can get him for free if we spend a bunch of money in undrafted free agency, which is way, way, way less of a cost than any draft pick will be. Right? Yeah, we'll spend $300,000 on you that's peanuts, but that's our undrafted budget, but that's peanuts in the grand scheme of things. So we'll gladly go all in there and then not have to spend a fifth. I think that's more of the value judgment, but in doing so, you're taking a risk and you're betting that nobody else drafts this guy, which they've been right about a lot, and they've done a good job of navigating that market. So I think that strategy is good, but it's a little bit like you kind of need these guys to work out for it to look good, right? So it's a little bit like, yeah, the strategy of be very good at this seems like it works. It's like, what do you think about the strategy of scoring touchdowns? Like, well, yeah, it's a goal more than it is a strategy. Vikings 129 says, what's the ideal type of defensive tackle for the Vikes when considering what Flores asks of that position? The big thing that I guess separates that Flores' scheme from like other normal schemes is there's a lot of stunting and looping. So you need a good lateral agility. You need that good momentum, but really it's a good horizontal get off. The lateral agility in the way that it would like show up in a short shuttle or a 3-cone or something, or like a drill, isn't really what I'm talking about. You need a good first horizontal step. If you have that good first horizontal step, I kind of don't care about your measured athleticism. You'll get to where you need to go quickly. But you know, that good 10 split, that good like bursty athleticism, obviously it's not going to hurt. Cine Season asks, with all the talk about our D-line in training camp, should we be worried for our O-line? I don't think so, because the headline, as I understand it, is not D-line is winning a lot. Like, we're not hearing all these big Harrison Phillips blowing stuff up. We're hearing about individuals who are having better performances than our expectations of them. But outside of the, oh my God, Flores blitzes all the time, it doesn't seem like this is the story of camp is that the quarterbacks are under pressure all the time. And in fact, the quarterbacks are zinging it all over the field, which kind of implies that the pressure can only be so bad. So I don't think so on the whole as a group. I think with, Turner showing out, it's like, this is an individual thing. It's not a group thing. Who gets beat a lot over and over and over again? I think that's the question that's going to give you an informative answer. 50-year Vikings fan. Cine Season, you asked a question. It wasn't even about Lewis Cine, but 50-year Vikings fan had one about Lewis Cine, who asks, do you view Lewis Cine as a scheme casualty or just a bust? If you listen to the N'Keal Harry Everyman series from earlier in the week about kind of my thoughts on like a draft bust, or we talked about this when we did Sam Darnold as well, like a draft bust. It almost is never, wow, the scouts just didn't realize how bad he was. They were just really dumb and they missed and they were stupid. It's never that. Those players were good in college. They just didn't make that next leap to the NFL for whatever reason. For Cine, I think, I do think a big part of it is he was drafted to be a back off and rally to the ball kind of player, rather than an instinctual, read the route, read the play, and drive on things kind of player. Flores needs you to be a little more aggressive than Donatel needed you to be, and that means that your instincts need to be in a place that Scenes were not at Georgia, and I don't think still are now. But the other thing is that Scene just could not tackle, which that was also an issue in Georgia. He did miss tackles. Like he was a smaller framed guy. That was a concern coming out. And the Vikings bet on him developing and maybe bulking up a little bit and getting better at that. And if he hasn't, then that's sort of the risk that you take. But it's not the scouts just being like, oops, I forgot how good football looks. It's like, we understand that this is an issue. We're going to make the conscious decision to risk him not getting better at it. And if he doesn't get better at it, okay, we took our gamble. Musical chairman of the board asks, which of the following wacky position or depth chart changes could you get behind, and do you have any like that? Here's my rule, all right? We got new people here for the season, right? People, it's here's my rule. If you give me a list of how do you feel about these things, and you give me more than 3 names on that list, I will not read more than 3 names on that list. You can't go into Twitter Tuesday asking me to evaluate your top 10 lists. So Lewis Cine to inside linebacker. No, got to be able to tackle. CJ Ham to kick return. Yeah, CJ Ham can do anything on the football field. You can't tell me I'm wrong. And Dalton Reisner to goal line running back. I'm always going to be for that. Andy Not Adam asks, there's always talk about upside in younger players. Is there a science behind determining one's upside, or is it merely speculation? When you hear about upside, I think most people are talking about athleticism. I think if you hear upside, you like 99 times out of 100, you'll see like a good relative athletic score on that player, and they're really just talking about a good combine and presenting it as like athletic upside. But it's different depending on kind of the context. Like when I say upside about somebody, I'm trying to get myself away from that because I think that's a little bit reductive. And so what I'm trying to do is get my brain into thinking of upside as, okay, I see what the vision is and there's work to get there, but I'm excited about what the vision is. I'm seeing that with JJ McCarthy right now. I'm seeing the upside of JJ McCarthy, not the measured athleticism of JJ McCarthy, but I'm seeing when he is on, when the mechanics are the way they are supposed to be. which they are sometimes, but not other times. And when he reads it quickly, which he does sometimes, but not other times, when all that stuff comes together, oh my goodness, it is beautiful. That's the upside. And we still have some mountains to climb to get there, but that's the upside for me. But I don't know. That's just the way I'm trying to like think about it, because I think that's more substantive. Hiort asks, if you had to fight anyone on the roster in a 1v1 fair fight, who would you want to fight the most and least, assuming they're in perfect condition? Who would I want to fight the most? So I would get destroyed by anybody here. All right. So I'm looking for what can I survive? If I show up and I'm like, I'm calling you out, Christian Darrisaw, I'm just going to die. I won't wake up from that. So, and that's probably the least. Probably the kicker then, right? Will Reichard? Can I pick an injured player? No, you said peak physical condition. Can I try against an injured player? But Mekhi Blackman, come on down. Are you technically on the roster? I'm going to dance around you. You're still on crutches? We'll try. No, you said assuming they are in perfect condition. So yeah, I guess I'd have to take the kicker, but I'm not beating the kicker in a fight. I don't care how much he looks like a kid you had to pull out of school because he was getting bullied. I should probably get out of here before I get myself in any more trouble. I'll see you all tomorrow, and as always, Skull.